Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing some of the rookie players who made either their NHL debut or their season debuts with the San Jose Sharks this season. Now, the reason I say only some of the Sharks rookie players is that this is not an exhaustive list of the players who were rookies for the Sharks this season and played games. In fact, there were 8 players that fall into that category, and I'm only going to be reviewing 5. The reason being is that 2 of those players, Adam Raska and Nick Cicek, didn't necessarily sort of catch my eyes, so to speak. I don't necessarily have a ton of hope, no offense to these 2 players, that they're going to become integral parts for the San Jose Sharks over the next couple of years. They could prove me wrong. Adam Raska could very well become a solid bottom line player, so a fourth line player for the San Jose Sharks. Nick Cicek could become a bottom pairing player for the San Jose Sharks, but at the moment, didn't necessarily feel super encouraged to review them, as I wouldn't necessarily have a ton to say. And then the final rookie player who I'm not discussing in this video is actually Fabian Zetterlund, who played a combined 67 games this season with both the New Jersey Devils and the San Jose Sharks, of course acquired in that Timo Meier trade. The reason I'm not discussing him is that this is I'm doing currently a sort of series of videos. A few days ago, it was my prospect update, so Sharks players who are playing in leagues that aren't the NHL and did not play a game with the Sharks this season, so like Brandon Coe or Shakir Mukhamadullin or Philip Bystedt. Today, I'm discussing the rookie players who are making their debuts or season or NHL debuts, but only played a few games, like Eklund or like Bordeleau. And in my next video, I'm going to be discussing more of the Mike Greer mid-season additions like Fabian Zetterlund, as well as players like Jacob Peterson or Jacob McDonald. So Zetterlund will definitely have his time. Even though he is a rookie, he will be not in this video. Having said all that, let's get right into it, as we have William Eklund up first. 8 games played, 2 goals, 1 assist, 4 3-points. Very important to mention, something that I have obviously mentioned in previous videos, is that Mike Greer clearly came in with a plan for the Sharks young players, and that plan was specifically to not have them play at the beginning of this season. A very transitional year for the San Jose Sharks, where they'd let these sort of veteran players play out this season and allow the younger players to develop in whichever leagues that they were in. For most of these players, it was in the AHL. However, near the end of this season, as we were winding down, it was an opportunity to sort of both reward the players who played with the Barracuda with some NHL time, as well as getting a look at how their development has gone thus far. And so Eklund was definitely, I believe, one of the first who actually did get called up, if not the first of all of these players. And it was definitely an improvement. Obviously, Eklund did play 9 games at the start of last season, so the big thing first that is the major difference is Eklund was given significantly more ice time. Back at the beginning of last year, he was barely managing to hit like a dozen minutes per game, at times finishing below even the double digits in terms of minutes, and yet this season he averaged almost 20 minutes of time on ice over these 8 games, constantly getting first line minutes, constantly getting first power play minutes. So clearly the responsibility was thrusted onto him that he could be a solid player for the San Jose Sharks. Now, points-wise, it doesn't necessarily jump off the page, but like I said, notable improvements from where he was last season. On top of a few other things, there was the him being more cognizant of the amount of time or the lack of time that he has on the ice to be able to make his plays. So he was definitely quicker in that regard. He was significantly more willing to take a shot compared to last season, where he was always seemingly looking for a pass, which was definitely a big thing that the organization was trying to iron into him. And then also just generally being a slightly more well-rounded player. Having said that, I'm sure there are some Sharks fans who were hoping / expecting for a bit of a more explosive look from William Eklund. While 8 games is not a huge sample size, him coming in at just 3 points in those 8 games, especially with the opportunities that he was given, might be viewed as a slight disappointment, considering the fact that he was a 7th overall pick, and this is now the year after his draft year, not his draft year where he's, immediately coming right out of the gate at 18 years old, but now it's the year after that with a full season of development in Sweden. It was last season. People were potentially expecting slightly more from him, but I think it'll be more next year where we'll really see where Eklund lands, as long as he actually is given the time of day on the San Jose Sharks, and that will be a very good indicator of where we can expect him to actually end up as a player. Having said that, in his time at least with the Barracuda this season, he did play very, very well as the main guy or one of the main guys with that squad in the AHL, one of the highest point scores for rookies at the AHL level, so there's definitely hope moving forward, and the short stint that he had at the NHL was positive enough to keep that hope up for sure. When it comes to the next player, that would be Thomas Bordeleau, who also had a stint last season, but instead of it being at the beginning of the year, it was actually at the end of the year after his NCAA season had concluded, signed a contract with the San Jose Sharks, played about 8 games, and looked rather solid in a more buried kind of third-line role, usually playing with Gregor and Balcers. I think he put up about 5 assists in the 8 games he played. This time around, he, like Eklund, was thrusted immediately into some pretty big roles, top-line minutes, first-line power play minutes, but while Eklund was able to handle them rather well, Bordeleau, on the other hand, kind of didn't meet those expectations, and eventually over the 8 games that he played, he moved from getting those top-line minutes and first power play minutes to getting more second power play minutes and kind of bottom 6 to middle 6 type of lineup opportunities. And I think that actually eventually ended up benefiting Bordeleau. When he was in those top line roles, he kind of faded a bit into the background, didn't really get to make much of anything happen, and looked much worse than he did near the end of last season. But once he started getting those maybe more muted minutes, that certainly helped him out, facing off against lesser competition than, the top lines of other teams. And we saw in particular in the final game of this season, Bordeleau actually have his best performance of the year. So that was definitely nice to see, and it does spark a bit of hope after what was a pretty rocky start to this 8-game stint. On the other hand, when it comes to his performance with the Barracuda this season, Thomas Bordeleau was rather solid for large chunks of that season. He led the AHL in rookie goal scoring. He was very effective on the power play. It just didn't necessarily make that massive transition to the NHL all that much easier, especially since in the time leading up to him being called up, he kind of struggled even at the AHL level. So it'll be very interesting to see where exactly he lands going to the NHL season next year. Obviously, development-wise, you'd probably hope he could make the main squad full-time, but you never know with what the stint showed here. Probably one of the more disappointing, I would say, rookie players for the San Jose Sharks this year. When it comes to Daniil Gushchin, he did not get the same level of look as Eklund and Bordeleau, who got about 8 games, which is still a very small sample size, but definitely more notable than the 2 games that Daniil Gushchin got. But in those 2 games, he still managed to make some good work of it, scored his first career goal as well as his first career assist for 2 points in those 2 games. And Daniil Gushchin definitely blew me away. It was really only a couple of years ago where Gushchin was kind of part of the junior league trio that I like to call. It was Gushchin, Tristan Robbins, and Brandon Coe. All 3 were playing in the OHL at that time. Gushchin was on the Niagara Ice Dogs, and while I was, thinking that he was pretty good at that junior level, the issue with him, especially compared to Coe and Robbins, is that both Coe and Robbins I could foresee being bottom 6 players for the San Jose Sharks, making their journey to the NHL significantly easier in comparison to Gushchin, who you were more expecting to kind of have to land in at a minimum the third line, but potentially even as a top 6 player. So it was going to be quite difficult for Gushchin to really make that jump. And so 2 years ago, I didn't necessarily have a ton of hope. And even at the beginning of this season, I wouldn't have necessarily ranked him right up near the top of the Sharks forward prospects. And yet, with his performance in the AHL, especially near the end of the season, and these 2 games that he got at the NHL, I am much higher on this player than I was even just a few months ago. And at this point, I have him potentially in that top 3 for Sharks forward prospects. Sure, I know a lot of hype is there for Philip Bystedt, especially after the strong World Juniors performance and SHL season that he has had, but considering he doesn't have that NHL or even sort of AHL experience with the San Jose organization, I'm actually going to be ranking Gushchin above him in that particular list. And right now, I could still technically have him below Bordeleau and Eklund for that 3rd place spot, but just based off of the very small sample sizes we've seen, maybe even Gushchin is in that 2nd spot above Bordeleau. That's how impressed I was with Gushchin. The main thing that really stood out to me, and especially in comparison to the other 2 players I've already talked about, Bordeleau and Eklund, is that Gushchin was very wise when it came to where he should be on the ice and being able to sort of be a finisher for the other players on his line. So when he was playing with, a Logan Couture or a Tomas Hertl, he knew where he needed to be able to finish up on those passes, on those plays. He has a very good shot as well to be able to bury on those chances as well. And I think, he's not necessarily a play driver, or at least we didn't get to see much of that through those two games, especially in comparison to William Eklund, where that's really where the advantage that Eklund has over him comes in, where Eklund you definitely could see be the guy to set up the plays, which is of course a very important factor in driving your own line. But Gushchin could be an extremely strong complementary piece, in particular on a line with William Eklund, and that could be definitely something we see potentially as soon as next year, but maybe more so in like 2 to 3 years time. So a good performance, even if it was a very short stint for Daniil Gushchin, I thought, and because of that confidence that he did generate at the NHL level, he finished the AHL season very strong, which was something that maybe wasn't super expected because of how not so great he started that AHL season. Next, we have Tristan Robbins. Like I said, was part of that OHL trio that was the junior league trio, I should say, because I don't think Tristan Robbins was in the OHL. He was in the WHL a couple of years ago. And so when it comes to Tristan Robbins, he gets called up, and unlike any of the three players above him, he did not actually register a point, no goal for him, no assist for him. So in the 3 games he played, he ends up with 0 points. It was generally an extremely average performance from Tristan Robbins, definitely not anything super positive to point out, but also not anything super negative, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. In terms of bad thing, it's not as though there was anything that really gave me hope that Robbins could ever really be anything more than maybe like a third liner at the NHL level. That doesn't necessarily mean his future as an NHL player is entirely locked in, but this 3-game stint doesn't give me necessarily hope compared to Gushchin, Eklund, and Bordeleau that he could ever become that top 6 player. But on the bright side, that doesn't necessarily need to be the future for every Sharks forward prospect that they have. Eventually you do need to fill up that bottom 6, and Robbins could very well be, because while he didn't put up any sort of points, he also wasn't necessarily a massive liability while on the ice, not making a ton of different mistakes, I would say, but outside of the usual sort of rookie jitters that you would expect from a player playing their first couple of NHL games. So generally, if I was to give him like a on 10 rating for the 3 games that he played, it would probably be pretty much a 5 all across the board. It was just an average game, and that's, decent enough for him. And then finally, we have Henry Thrun. Now, unlike the other 4 players on this list, Thrun did not play with the San Jose Barracuda this season. Instead, he was doing his NCAA season with Harvard. And also, unlike the other 4 players on this list, he didn't even start in the Sharks organization at the beginning of this year. This is a player who was not at all on my radar for as much as 4 months ago, because of the fact that he wasn't in the Sharks organization. Like I said, he was with the Anaheim Ducks, but because he is an NCAA player, he had the opportunity to finish out his senior year and then just not sign with Anaheim. So since that was indeed going to happen, the Sharks acquire him in a trade. They managed to sign him, and he plays 8 games for the Sharks this season. 0 goals, 2 assists for 2 points. Both of those assists actually came in his season debut against the Vegas Golden Knights. His other 7 games were pointless, and it was that pointless makes it sound a bit weird, but meaning no points gotten. But what was very interesting about Henry Thrun's stint this season, the 8 games that he did play, is that there are kind of 2 types of rookie players. Some rookie players will come into their first career games and have those sort of rookie jitters and maybe not make the smart play more often than not in that first game, and so they'll get maybe a bit more comfortable as their season goes on. And then there are some rookie players who go the opposite, and they use those rookie emotions of playing that first game that you've built up your entire life to trying to make it to the NHL, and you finally do it, and they use the emotion of that to have like the game of their lives, and then it kind of falls off a bit as the season goes on. And it feels as though Thrun kind of falls into that second category, because that debut against a very strong Vegas Golden Knights team, mind you, was incredibly impressive. One of the best debuts that we saw this season, if not the best debut that we saw this season for the San Jose Sharks, and honestly one of the best rookie debuts that we have seen in a long time from a Sharks perspective. He was looking like a seasoned veteran of 10 years at the NHL level. His defensive awareness was extremely impressive. His net front presence was very solid, being able to clear out out. His stick positioning was very, very good, and all of these things jumped off the page as immediately being like, this is the future of San Jose Sharks defense. However, over the next few games, that definitely did fall off slightly. He never really became a terrible player for the San Jose Sharks. Absolutely not. He was always at the very least like an average. Again, if we were to use a score of on 10, I would always give him at least like a 5 on 10, and frequently he would easily be like a 6 or 7 on 10 as well. But of course, after that first game, expectations maybe were very high, and he didn't necessarily live up to them over the next few games, but still a player who asserted himself as a very solid option for the San Jose Sharks. He eventually ended up on a pairing with Erik Karlsson, which was quite cool to see, and even though it didn't necessarily amount to amazing things for either of those two players, it was still generally a solid pairing and a very solid view of this player for the San Jose Sharks over this 8-game stretch, and definitely bodes well for the Sharks, who came into the season with very few defensive prospects, I would say. I mean, if we were thinking about the Sharks' best defensive prospects at that point, we're looking at like Ryan Merkley, who's no longer on the team, Santeri Hatakka, who's also no longer on the team, and then like Artemi Kniazev, who I guess is still doing rather well with the Barracuda, but didn't make his debut with the San Jose Sharks this year. And Greer went out, he addressed this issue. They bring in Shakir Mukhamadullin, who I mentioned a few days ago, as well as Henry Thrun, who I have just talking about right now, and that is definitely helping shore up that defensive, I guess, shortage that the Sharks had in terms of prospect, and Thrun showed off a very good stretch of games here at the NHL. But that will do it for this rookie look. Clearly, none of these players necessarily had amazing set of games, but they all had pretty solid. Thrun looked very good, Eklund looked quite good, Gushchin looked extremely good, but in a very short stint of games. Bordeleau looked okay, but nothing super amazing, and Robbins looked quite average and decent. So generally a pretty good season for the Sharks rookies near the end of the year. It should also be noted that all of these kind of performances can be taken with a bit of a grain of salt, because this was also at a time where the Sharks as a whole were kind of just completely lost cause season, so you can expect that some of the maybe supporting cast of the team didn't necessarily have a ton of motivation to do exceptionally well, so maybe that could help drive down the performances of some of these players, but generally still pretty good. Class dismissed.